You see it recording or you got notified or something?
Yes.
All right, cool. All right, I mean, I think at this point we're still like just starting this kind of first main chapter where it's focusing on the queue. So maybe since we didn't do like record the book club for the first half or the first section, we can just kind of run through kind of the intro. I don't think it really needs too much introduction, but I mean, anything you want to hit from like our last reading that really stood out to you
Um,
to get everyone
sure.
up to speed?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the I guess beginning pieces of this book is like just 1% improvement each day, or over a certain period of time, and how much that can compound. 1% seems like such a small amount, and a lot of people tend to shoot for something higher. But 1% improvement is something that's sustainable, and if you take it 365 days throughout a year, if you're able to improve 1% in one of these skill sets, that can be a radical change in your life. So it's kind of the I guess, yeah, just power behind that. Just being consistent with small improvements was kind of a piece of that. Anything you want to add?
No, I mean that part was really interesting to me. I think the part that stood out most to me is like identifying a goal that you want, like an outcome, and then kind of working the way back and identifying then the process on how you get to that. So I want to own $1 million home is the outcome. So then you think about like who's the type of person who could afford that. They're someone who's financially responsible and has been saving their money and has a good income. Um, and then maybe then you even take a step more back and then think about, I forget the phrase he uses, but it's like this kind of going back to our last book, like the spirit or like kind of your thought
Yeah,
process, um, kind of before you even get to that point. So like just kind of how you think about yourself in the world.
totally. Yeah, it's a good callback to meditations. It did seem really similar. It's like it's changing your identity, right? Because once you change your identity, then the system kind of goes along with that. It's like, how do I become more of that person? And then the habits that they develop, you end up developing as well. So, absolutely.
Yeah, because I think if you can like change that base person, then you're not, yeah, I mean, this is totally going back to meditations. Then if you can like change the base person, then like it doesn't, it's not malaligned then with your goal. Then it's just easy to be one with nature. But if you're not fiscally responsible and you're trying to earn enough to make a house, that is against your nature, and so it's going to be a constant fight all the time. So it'll just be easier to change your behavior to or change your spirit or yeah, I wish I remember the word he used, but that kind of thing more than just kind of the process, kind of the step before
Yeah,
that leads to the process, the mentality, the way you think about it, stuff like that.
absolutely.
I mean, I think the one other kind of main point that he's bringing up in the introduction in the first few chapters is this general concept of these four steps. So when there's a habit, good or bad, it's kind of categorizing in these four longitudinal steps, and it starts the cue, and then after the cue, like you see a donut, then you have a craving, you want to eat the donut, and then there's the response, what you actually do. So then you actually eat the donut. And then there's the rewards. Then you get the sugar spike and the dopamine spike. And then it's a kind of a continuous thing. And it works like that for the good and the bad habits.
Yeah, absolutely. Good breakdown.
Okay. I mean, that's kind of the main thing I think we've covered. And so this first part is then just looking at the queue. That's right. Are we
Yeah.
even in the queue in this first section, or is the queue kind of starting at
So we did 3 to 7, which is, yeah, focusing on the cue, and kind of the overarching theme of these chapters we're going to be walking through is make it obvious or make it invisible, and that depends on if it's a good cue or a bad cue, right? Um, so that's, yeah, the overarching theme. And chapter 3 um, breaks down the 4 steps, I think, a little bit more. Um, and then kind of just one thing I was talking about before we started recording, one section of it was when you're in the midst of a habit, the activity of your brain tends to decrease. That's something I personally experience a lot. Like if I ever go to a new gym, my brain activity is really high. I'm looking for, the machines. I don't know where they are. I'm noticing my environment a lot more. Whereas, if I'm at a gym I'm familiar with, it's like I'm really just focusing on the system, right? because I already have a habit of, I know exactly where I'm going for this day and so forth. I know where everything is. So my brain activity is, decreased in that sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think I keep thinking back about this, yeah, dopamine response specifically, and how he's describing it. You're mentally exhausted for a long day of work, and then you learn that playing video games relaxes you. You're exploring, and then bam, the rewards. The reward is just this flood of dopamine. And
Yep.
I also think you bring up another interesting point about changing the location, which is that even in this chapter, or are you kind of done just touching on that? But I think it might be
Yeah, I'm
later.
sorry. Changing location is chapter 6. I meant more just like how automatic your habit is when you're in a familiar environment. But yeah, the environment's a little bit later in chapter 6.
Got it. Yeah, well, I think it's kind of foreshadowed. Yeah, that's interesting. What else did you get from this chapter?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I had, so back when I was he's talking about how habits, a lot of people look at habits and it's like, well, if I'm just a habit-based human, I have less freedom in my life. And he's kind of making the point, well, it's really the other way around. When you do build habits, you become a more free person. Um, and all these things I really just attach to personal stuff in my life. So I'm going to be just going through, just personal examples. I remember when I was working at Chick-fil-A, I had a terrible habit of getting home and I'd close. So I'd get home at like 10:30 or 11 p.m. and I'd play League of Legends up until 4 a.m. The cue would be I get back to my room. I'm tired. I've been walking around. I see my computer, the cue. Um, and then the craving is just thinking about, how much I enjoy playing the game and how I don't really have to think about any of my problems while I'm playing it. And then the response is just to get on my computer and I'd play it until 4 a.m. Um, so I'm not getting anything productive done. I'm not really solving any of the problems that I have going on in my life. And then I end up waking up at like 12 p.m. So my entire day is just revolved around working and then playing this game. And so that was automatic for me for months, right? Until there's some other factors that came into my life that helped me change that. But that's something I, really attached to for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I like how this part makes it delineates the habit from the actual cue. He says, I think specifically, what you crave is not the habit itself, but the change in state it delivers. And so your yeah, your habit is like the change in state. At that time, it was the change in state you got from playing the video games and turning your mind off. It wasn't the cue of seeing your computer there. And it's kind of nice because obviously habits kind of are this groove that you get in and it's hard to get out. But the cue is not the habit. Like the cue can be changed. Like the cue, just put your computer away or hide the donuts. I thought this was like a really cool way of applying this idea of the cue relationship of a cue to a habit, and then like thinking out how you could like tangibly use that to help with habits. And so then he goes into
Totally.
talking about how, yeah, the cue is not about noticing the reward. The cue is about wanting the reward, and the response is about obtaining the reward. And if you eliminate the cue, and your habit will never start. Reduce the craving, and you won't experience what the motivation to act. Make the behavior difficult, and you won't be able to do it. And if the reward fails to satisfy your desire, then you'll have no reason to do it again. So it's like all these four different steps are like modifiable, and you can just like manipulate them for a bad habit to make them harder, and you can manipulate them to make them easier for a good habit.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's an amazing point, dude. And I hadn't really looked at it that way. Like I always thought, what do I need to modify? It's my behavior, right? That's kind of the mindset I'd always been in. It's like I never once, when I was going through that phase, did I think, maybe moving my computer out of the room, right, could actually make a tangible effect. What I would always get in the state of is I'd get there and I'd be like, I just need to make the decision not to do it because that's the only power I have. So that's an amazing point as, he breaks this down, the power that this 4-step has. Um, it's almost like the decision, and I guess we'll get into this later, but it's like the decision is once you get to that decision, it's not a decision. If the cue is there and the craving is there strong enough, at that point, it's almost not a decision, right? And that's where I would always get locked up. That is where I tried to stop, when at that point the decision has almost already been made. So
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I think saying it's already been made is a little like
not giving enough credit to
like
like,
nihilist, like, oh, it's already decided, like I can't do
oh
anything.
well,
No, you're
yeah,
not that, but like I don't know if that's quite it, but it certainly does take a lot more willpower if
mhm.
you got seen the cue and then been given the craving to not do that habit. Um, and I think he was saying, I can't remember, it was this chapter or later on. He's like, I don't have the greatest willpower. I don't even really need to use my willpower that much because like I've aligned all
Yeah,
these things really nicely. And then I was thinking just like, in terms of like weight loss or just healthy eating, like I also personally don't have very good control. Like if I'm at my parents' house, I'll eat a bunch of crap. But the thing is, like what I eat 95% of the time is what's at my house. And I don't have anything bad here. And so I'm just never eating
hey,
anything
don't
bad.
lie to the viewers. Show me your bagels right now, bro. You got those, don't you?
Eat bagels daily. Like I'm not, craving candy or soda or, all types of junk because it's just not here. And so I'm not even having to use willpower. Um, yeah, it's kind of an interesting idea
Absolutely.
that I feel like we focus so much on willpower and being able to like not uh, give in to the temptation. Yeah,
That's
but an easier strategy is just to change, not have the temptation in the first place.
totally, man. And you are a good beacon of influence for me, at least, because yeah, especially with that instance, the type of food, right? Um, I'm sure if you had, like you said, donuts, you had cereal, you probably would indulge. But yeah, you've created an environment at your apartment. So when I was there and I was staying, it was really easy to eat healthy because the alternative, what am I going to do? Like fucking DoorDash, while I'm staying at your place? Like, no, I'm going to have the food that's there. It's convenient. Um, and it is kind of jumping ahead, but on that chapter 7, this was a really cool quote. It's the people with the best self control are the ones who need to use it the least. Um,
Yeah,
I never,
yeah,
I never thought of it like that. Like that's really awesome. And it gives me hope, right? Because it seems so much more manageable to control your environment so you don't have to practice this like heroic willpower all the time. Because you are going to falter, right? No matter how disciplined you are, if you're in a bad environment, your self control can only take you so far. So,
for
um,
sure. Yeah.
we are kind of jumping ahead, but that's okay. It's good open discussion. Do you anything else on chapter 3 you want to talk about?
One thing is just this table at the end, and it's kind of, I mean, we've kind of already talked about it, but it's showing kind of how to change these four different aspects for either a good or a bad habit. So if you want to make a good habit for the when you get the cue, make the cue super obvious. Put your running shoes at the door. If you have the craving, make it really attractive. You wear your favorite hat or whatever when you run, or I don't know, you listen to your favorite music or something. Um, Response, make it easy. Don't kill yourself on the run, and then reward, make it satisfying. Have a smoothie after or something. I don't need to do it for the bad habit, but I like the simplicity of the table. I also like digesting information that's like in table format over like paragraph format. So I love this.
I 100% agree. That I related to that a lot too. Seeing that, it's like, okay, now it's like really clicking. So thank you for sharing that. It yeah makes the concepts a lot more like tangible. You can get it for sure. I was going to ask, so in terms of like the cues, because I know you talked a little bit about how you want to quit biting your fingernails, and that's something I also struggle with a lot. I'll do it all the time, just instinctively. And I wanted to ask, like, do you feel like the cue for something like that is it based in stress? Is it maybe you're bored, or is it so ingrained into your life that it could be anything at this point?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I've been reflecting on this entire time as I've been reading it is like how does that really apply to like the specific habit that I'm trying to break? And I'm having a hard time like identifying any cue. It's definitely not out of stress or anxiety. If anything, it's just more like when I'm relaxed and not paying attention. And then since I've been reading this book, I have made anytime I notice myself chewing my fingernails, I will consciously stop, and that's different than what it was 2 weeks ago. But I'm still getting into times when I'm biting my fingernails without paying attention. Um, and I can't remember where he says this, but he's like these four things, the cue and the craving, this is what happens when you start a habit. But then later on in life, then you can then it just becomes like something that happens that there isn't necessarily like a clear cue, or it's
Yep.
not even like, oh, you see the donut sitting out. It's just like, oh, it's Monday morning. Like this is always when we have donuts or whatever. So maybe that cue expands to more like situational things. So yeah,
Absolutely.
long
It's
answer.
so ingrained. It's so ingrained in your life, the good and the bad things, right? If my toothbrush was in a different spot, I would still brush my teeth that day, right? So, I mean, I don't need a cue at that point. Whereas, yeah, at this point, we don't need cues to chew our fingernails because it's done. But I want to give you props, man. If you were able to consciously stop yourself a few times, remember it's that 1%, right? So you're not going to obviously stop doing it overnight. But if you were consciously able to stop it, you're already reducing the frequency of it. That's a great step. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, thank you. This isn't the first time that I've consciously stopped biting my fingernails. This is something I've done multiple times before and failed multiple times. So I don't think that like this in itself is going to be good enough to get me to the point. I think I just need to
No,
spend more time
it's
like
a step.
meditating on the cue like itself because I think there is some cue and I think it's something about relaxation and turning my mind off. But I think I have to narrow it down a little more specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So let's, yeah, then start getting into, we have been talking about the queue a little bit, but chapter 4. Um, it's funny. There's a section in chapter 4 where it's talking about just different cues. And in it, he says something about a phone. And it was funny. I read that, like the word phone, and then not even thinking about it, I just instinctively reached over, grabbed my phone, pulled up Instagram, and it's like my brain was shut off. And then, maybe within 10 seconds of scrolling, I'm like, whoa. It's like this is the perfect example of like all the cue I needed for that was to literally see the word phone on this text, and then my subconscious just takes over. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Like while reading about cues, him talking about the phone, I literally do kind of what he's talking about. And then there's also a quote that there's a psychologist, I think he attributed this to, but I like this a lot. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Um, and so, yeah, there's obviously a lot more steps you have to take, and I have to take to stop biting your fingernails. But I think making it conscious, and me making conscious that I grab my phone, that is the first step. And there's so much that has to be built off of that. But I think that quote's really applicable for noticing cues at first.
Yeah, I liked that whole concept of pointing and calling.
Yes,
Calling something out that he gives an example of like a train conductor and then in Japan and how they call everything out. And that's like exactly how it's done in medicine too. Like in surgery, you're calling out everything that you're doing. Like, oh, hand me a scalpel. Okay, I'm handing you a scalpel on your right side. Like everything's really communicated. So yeah, that it minimizes errors and then brings it into your conscious. So I really like this idea and applying it both to good and bad habits.
absolutely. I love that. What I thought of was Grampy. Whenever we go out to eat, we'll get in the car and he'll say out loud, he'll say, I have my wallet, I have my glasses, and I have my grandson. And it's always kind of goofy to me, and it still kind of is, but it's funny to see kind of the baseline because I remember one time he did forget something, and I'm pretty sure he didn't do it that time. So, there is definitely some power to that for sure.
I wonder if he did that after reading this book. I mean, he's an engineer. I imagine they do that stuff all the time, that like in
Yeah.
engineering.
I don't I think he did it before because he I think has read this book within the last year, and he's done it since I've gotten dinner with him. So I think he taught this author that practice
Yeah,
actually.
yeah, yeah. Wait, Crampy is this author, right?
Yeah. Willie Rudkotsky.
Yeah.
He
But
shouts me out
his
with it.
name's Grampy, I thought.
Yeah. Cool. Oh, another kind of piece about this chapter was like making a behavior list. Um, so getting really minute with it, being like, okay, I wake up and then I go to the bathroom. and then I brush my teeth, or I get coffee, and then I check my phone, and then maybe I eat a bagel or a donut, and it's like making that behavior list, maybe even till you leave for work, and writing down which of those are neutral, which of those are positive, and which of those are negative. I thought that was a pretty interesting concept. Just kind of getting that on paper might help me at least.
Yeah. Yeah, that one was interesting. I had like a hard time kind of seeing the value in that. I guess if you lived like this kind of unevaluated life where you never thought about other things that I'm doing, am I spending 30 minutes watching TV before work or something in the morning when I could exercise? I guess if you had a lot of those things in your life, this would be helpful. I guess I didn't quite understand how this would be valuable.
Sure. I mean, I'll say for me, maybe it's not 30 minutes, but I'll wake up and, look at my phone for 5 minutes, right? And I'm aware of that. And I'm aware that I don't want to do it. So maybe putting this down, writing it as a negative, making me acutely aware of when I wake up, I do that. It might help me avoid it. Not for sure, but that's something that might potentially help me, I'll say.
Nice. Yeah, I'll be interested to see if it does.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Anything else on chapter 4?
There was just one line on page 66 at the top that says, "Don't blame yourself for your faults. Don't praise yourself for your successes." It just reminded me a lot of meditations and the idea of stoicism. So just a nice reminder.
Absolutely. Yeah, they blend together a lot of concepts.
Yeah. All right. Chapter 5.
Cool. So it seemed like kind of the baseline of this was, I guess, building out a plan. Implementation intention is a word they use. Um, one thing that potentially could help me as well that they said writing down would help is I will, in quotations, behavior at time in location. Um, Again, just getting something written down is huge. I think this was also the chapter they talked about. They had a study where they had people that they wanted to have exercise. And they showed these people, nutritional videos, motivation videos, and saw how often those people went to the gym. And I think it was something like 25 to 33%. Then they had another group where they did the exact same thing, but they had these people write down a specific plan for when they were going to do it, where they were going to do it. And I think that study was something like 90%. So it was just fascinating to see, like, to put that on pen and paper, to actually have that plan and go into the specifics of it too, really can put it to fruition a lot more often.
Yeah, for sure. This is like part of this concept called motivational interviewing, which sounds kind of patronizing, but it's something that you learn in medical school about how to like convince a patient to like do something that you know is good for them, like to diet and to lose weight. And you like, yeah, I mean, there's like multiple different steps, but the kind of the last step is to actually set a plan and make them like identify exactly what foods they're going to eat every single morning for the next week. Or someone who's like addicted to like chronic opioids that like we're prescribing at the clinic, you like write this opioid contract and say like, okay, like this next week we're going to give you zero point 0.5 milligrams, and the week after that we're going down to 0.25 and we're not going up, and then we're going to do a drug screen at the end, and you can't be positive for anything else. And so we set this very specific plan, and they end up being way more accountable. So yeah,
Interesting.
this made a lot of sense. It aligns with my kind of personal experience.
Yeah, that's cool that you get to see that. Yeah, in your actual career, it being used. That's awesome. Um, oh, okay. I think this I really like this concept too. In chapter 5, they start talking about habit stacking, and this is really, really relatable to me. Habit stacking, for better or for worse. I feel like I've always been a very momentum based human. So I tended to habit stack without really understanding what habit stacking was. But negative one, for example, I've thought of that I've done, the last few months is like something slightly inconvenient, or I'll hear some slightly sad news. So that will lead me to end up getting drunk that night, which will make me end up waking up late. And then I'll probably smoke weed and then I'll do the bare minimum amount for work. And then after that, I'll play video games and smoke more weed. And then because I did that, I'll order DoorDash, right? And now throughout this entire day, I've just done bad habit stacking. Um, and I've seen it happen to me so often. So I really liked seeing this. Yeah, that visual right there is a perfect way to put it. And just the power of habit stacking, right? And the power of momentum with habits. I'm also, I think, really good at doing this in a positive way. If I wake up early, I'll get to the gym, get work done, reach out to people that I haven't reached out to. I make it a really productive day, and I have it stack off of that. So that was a really cool aspect that I enjoyed.
Yeah, I like that he articulated the habit stacking. I guess I too have kind of anecdotally noticed myself trending towards that for good habits. Surfing right into lifting. I mean, part of it is that the reward is already giving you this dopamine rush, and so you're feeling confident and energetic and kind of ready to kind of jump into the next thing. But it makes a lot of sense to kind of align um, if you're struggling to add on certain things like brushing your teeth and then going right into reading a book, going right into kissing your wife or girlfriend goodnight or something like that. If you struggle to do those things,
Absolutely.
yeah, I like the habit stacking a lot. Some other things that stood out to me is, I mean, kind of going back to having this plan. But he was also talking about like having once you have an intention set, it's like way easier. You don't need to spend any time thinking about it or coming up with like the pros and cons. And it reminds me of just like decision fatigue and how like some people just get really tired. I feel like this idea that you might have like 100 good decisions in a day, if you spend them all on like what you're gonna wear and if you're gonna gel your hair and all this like bullshit, then you're not able to
Those
like
matter. Those matter. All right.
good point. Then you're not able to like really apply your willpower to like the decisions later on. Um, it reminded me of that Sam Harris book that we've been talking about lying, how you just decide. I think that's the part that like convinced me the most that like you just decide you're not going to lie and then it just becomes so easy. Then you like never have to like think about it. Then you're just like, no, like someone's asking me something and it's uncomfortable truth. There's like no other option than to tell them the truth. I don't need to like cause all this internal anxiety like to come up with something. So I really like that.
Like
Um,
you made the decision once, right? When you finish that, you're like, okay, I've now made the decision. I'm never going to have to make this decision again, which makes it way, way easier. I like that.
yeah, and going back to what you were saying about the last chapter, how about like having habits makes you like more free in a way. Like having these decisions already pre-made makes you like more free to like I like put your mind power towards something that like is actively going to change. Whereas this, there's only
Totally.
one choice.
Absolutely.
So I like that. Later on, he talks about this Diderot effect, where the Diderot effect states that obtaining a new possession often creates a spiral of consumption that leads to additional purposes. This is like, I do this
Surfboards.
totally. Like, I don't buy anything really ever, but then once I started buying Christmas presents for my family, then like the floodgates opened up. I noticed myself just like buying stupid shit, like this hoodie that I didn't need, and like this surfboard wax that I didn't need, and just like it's just a lot easier to spend money the once I already like started it. So I noticed this specifically with spending it, and I don't think I have like a spending problem. But I do notice that this is like a really powerful mechanism on me. So I'm very glad I don't have like a shopping addiction because this would be really hard.
Totally. I mean, I know people that do, right? And it's brutal because you break that seal, and then any purchase almost feels like a necessity, Um, and it just stacks on top of each other. So absolutely. Um,
And for me, it's not even like I have more of a want for this thing. It's like the consequences of spending money have like completely gone away. Like
lower.
if that
Yeah.
would have happened 2 months ago, I'd be like, hell no, I'm like way too greedy to like give away my money for like a jacket or a sweatshirt or whatever. But then
Yeah.
like when I saw it, I was like, oh, I mean, I already spent like $100 on my like sister's presents. Like, what's this like 50
What's this
bucks?
extra amount?
Yeah,
Totally.
but it's the exact same money. It's exact same amount.
And it compounds too, right? Because then you buy that hoodie and now you're this much more that you've spent throughout the day. So it's like, okay, what's compounding, adding a little bit more to it? So absolutely. That's a great example of it.
That's kind of all I got for chapter 5.
Cool. That's all I had too. So let's get to chapter 6, the power of your environment. Um, so being your environment, that's a theme that I've dealt with a lot recently, and I cannot agree more with kind of the points he was making. I'm a human. I think that's very impressionable for both good and bad influences. So if I'm with a group of people and bad decisions are happening, I will gravitate towards that very easily, and then vice versa too. If I'm with a group of people that are making good decisions, I gravitate to that really easily as well. Um, so just in talking about how important it is to set yourself up for a good environment um, is really cool. I like the formula that he also broke down. It made it a little bit mathematical, where it's behavior equals the function of the person and the environment, right? That's a pretty, oh, there you go. Hell yeah, right there. That was an awesome part of that as well. It makes it, clear for my math head.
Yeah, dude, I was thinking the same thing. Like, wow, this like makes so it is so easy to understand. Like seeing this formula. Um, yeah, it's just funny how like you like train in a certain way to learn things in a certain way, and then your brain like just it's easier to comprehend things in that way forever. Like table
Absolutely.
or like dysfunction. But yeah, I really like that. The behavior is a function of your environment and the importance of the environment and how impactful that can be. Um,
One,
yeah, this brings up then the other point that I think we were discussing earlier that then like your environment has a huge control. Oh, I guess the one example I wanted to bring up is like it's like well documented. If you get less sleep, you're like more likely to give into sugar cravings the next day. And so this is totally like a sleep deprived environment puts you at a higher risk for having poor behavior. Um, but then he also brings up that if you change your environment, this can be a powerful way of like kind of restarting yourself and setting these new habits. They also have done studies where like when you walk through a doorway, there's like something that happens in your frontal lobe that like kind of resets and like puts you in this new mindset. So it's pretty common for somebody to like walk into a different room and walk through a doorway and then completely forget what they were going to do, even though they
yeah,
were thinking about it 10 seconds later. And it's because like this new environment changes kind of your mental state and you're like prepared for something new. Um,
absolutely.
so I've been thinking a lot about then like you and possibly moving to California. I mean, if you're trying to change habits, I mean, what better way than like completely shifting your environment?
100% on a macro scale that just can make such a big impact. But I kind of like your point, like just passing through a door, right? One thing I haven't thought about much was like changing your environment on a micro scale. Um, and what was funny is as I was reading this in my bed, taking notes on my bed, and he was talking about like what's the quote exactly? I want to find it. One space, one use. I like that because I am not like that at all. I have had points where, I might spend 10 goddamn hours on my bed and that could be doing 10 different activities, right? Um, so I like that. And when I was going through this chapter, I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to dedicate when I'm reading this book, I'm gonna be sitting here, at this table in the living room, and that's going to be the space it's dedicated to. And I don't know if what it was, but it did feel like I was a little bit more focused. I was getting through it a little bit quicker. So that was funny that I could kind of apply that right away, right?
Yeah.
Um,
It'll also help you with your sleep. I mean, the first step if somebody is struggling to fall asleep, you say, okay, there's a new rule. You can only use your bed for two things: sleep and sex. You can't use it for anything else. No
yep.
watching movies, no reading, scrolling on your phone, no hanging out. Like it can only be used for those two things to kind of reorient your brain towards what happens in that specific environment. So yeah, this makes a lot of sense to me.
Absolutely. Well, if you don't mind me asking, is that something you struggle with, or have you been able to really just keep your bed and keep it to the activities that should be in it? And then if you're on your phone or you're working, do you ever catch yourself just like laying in bed doing that, or is that not really an issue for you?
That's not really an issue for me, and I've never struggled to fall asleep. So, yeah,
Cool. That's
lucky.
good. More
Yeah,
evidence.
yeah.
Love it. That's really all I had for 6.
Same.
Short but really impactful. Yeah, really, really impactful. Okay, on to number 7. Self-control seems like kind of the theme, and it's still talking a lot about the environment. I know he opens up this chapter talking about the like heroin epidemic for soldiers in Vietnam, and how studies were done, and they ended up finding out like 30 or was it like 25% of the soldiers were addicted to heroin. But what he found super fascinating is once the war is over, they returned. They found that 9 out of the 10 soldiers who used it in Vietnam had eliminated their addiction overnight when they came home. Because, I mean, obviously, being in war is an extreme stress and a situation that would make even the strongest person succumb to addiction, I'm sure. And you have all of these triggers of you're not getting very much sleep. The people you're with are also using as well. You're always in an unstable, uncertain environment. But once they were returning to back home to more stability, the people they were hanging around with were their families who didn't have these addictions. It was so much easier for them to quit that addiction. And that's fascinating to me because, I mean, a heroin addiction chemically is one of the strongest addictions in the world. But 9 out of 10, that is such a high percentage that was able to kick it. So I really like that story.
Yeah, great story. I guess I don't doubt the general trend that there's less people addicted when they come home and the environment's better. Definitely skeptical of this 90% drop, and leaves no citations. This is what drives me crazy about this
Trust me,
book.
bro.
It is not evidence based at all. He makes these claims, and it doesn't even seem like he's like a person of like expertise. It's not like
No,
some super successful person who's done a bunch of stuff. He just is like a writer who like has
he
been
just
talking about
started a
this.
newsletter that like became really popular, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, the
So all of
credibility.
this stuff is like, but whatever. That what he's saying makes,
Appearances list, Taylor, and even if it's 5 out of 10 people, it's still impactful, right?
and that's what I'm saying. Like the general trend makes a lot of sense and is probably true.
Mhm.
But yeah, I do question the validity of some of the specifics.
But we're
Um,
sending you a strongly worded email after this.
yeah.
Say, cite your sources, brother.
I like
Um,
how this, I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but he describes like willpower as a finite resource. So, yeah, this kind of decision fatigue, or you only have 100 good decisions or something like that. So, you might as well use it on like the things you have to use your critical thinking for, and then just change your environment for like the easy stuff.
yeah, absolutely.
Um,
One real quick thing I also kind of wanted to touch on is so I hung out with Colin last night, right? And we got dinner and yeah, just hung out. Anyways, he was vaping, right? And so I've been in an environment the last few months where I'm surrounded by people that are vaping and smoking cigarettes. And it was, relatively easy to avoid smoking. I got to say, though, it's interesting. My craving for wanting to smoke last night when Colin was smoking was so much higher than it had ever been before. And I don't know if it was just the connection to, I've smoked Colin's vape maybe the last 10 years, right? So there's such like an embedded connection where if I see Colin smoking his vape, that is something I've just been programmed almost to want to ask to hit his vape as well. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's like, it reminded me the nicotine aspect of it is almost not what's prevalent. It's like, how embedded are the habits and the familiarity of the whole situation. So, yeah.
yeah, that's super interesting.
So,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah. I mean, kind of going back to the cue is not the habit, or even the craving is not the habit. The nicotine is not specifically the habit for you. It seems to be that it's, or at this point, because you're no longer like physiologically addicted to the nicotine. At this point, it's just like you're like the environment is the cue. That's fascinating. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So did
I also,
you vape?
what's that? Sorry.
Vape?
No, I didn't. I held strong. I
Oh,
held
yeah.
strong. I was close to asking him, but I was like, nope, I've done good. I can avoid it. And it passed. Was doing it all throughout the night. It was just when he first pulled it out, it was like 10 seconds of damn, that sounds fucking nice right now. And then it was fine. right? But it's just getting over that little hump for me.
Yeah.
Um, I did want to ask you. So there was also something mentioned in this chapter, and going back to maybe the credibility and where are your sources, bro. I'm interested if you believe this, just coming from your medical background. He was saying that they did a study where they showed cocaine to addicts for such a short amount of time that their eyes could not even process that it was cocaine, yet their craving for it increased. That seemed really interesting. It was like their brain or their eyes don't even know it's cocaine, but there's something subconscious that increased their craving anyway. I was a little skeptical about that and kind of want to know your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worded in like kind of a misleading way. Like the eyes are still seeing it, the brain is still comprehending what that is, and that's what's causing the craving. I think it's one of those things like in like Fight Club when he splices in like the porn in like the kids movie. I think it's like one of those things where you just like you like kind of don't know if it actually happened because it happened so
Yeah.
quickly, but
Yeah.
your brain still comprehended the data and your eyes definitely did still see it. So
Sure.
that's not so surprising to me. That makes sense. Yeah, not too skeptical of it. But again, if he doesn't cite his sources, we can never verify. So it's yeah,
Yeah.
lesson for if we ever become writers.
Hmm. For sure.
We won't, or I won't.
Hey, you
And
never
the
know.
last thing
We
for
got
me
a
was
good
just
writer's assistant in our back pocket
that's
to
true.
be a very good writer. Yeah.
Well, it's a terrible writing assistant. It helps with
For
volume.
now. For now.
The last thing for me was just the graphic at the end. And so I think this is going to be like kind of the main output of the book, is the grade it could have it, and it kind of breaks it down in these four different laws. And so this section was just all focusing on the first law. So then just kind of wrap it up for the day then. Um, the first law, the fill out the habits scorecard, you brought that up. Using implementation intentions, I will do this in this circumstance. If somebody challenges me to a fight while I'm out surfing, I will say yes and challenge them back.
Great
Then I don't
example.
have to think about it, and it
Yeah,
becomes
yeah, great
a
example.
good habit.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
great habit, bro. You're gonna be feared all throughout Santa Monica.
yeah. Uh, Use habit stacking. After I beat up one kook, I'll paddle back out and get barreled. Um, and then design your environment. We talked about that a ton, changing your environment. So that was
Be
kind
in
of
an
the
environment where people want to fight you. So find an area where they're very territorial about their ways. All right.
I don't want to fight that much.
Oh, okay. Someone's not very committed then.
Just a little bit. Yeah.
Nice.
All right. Any closing remarks from you?
I don't think so. We're making good progress on this book. Yeah, I think we can finish it pretty quickly. But yeah, I've been enjoying it.
So want to do then the next, just the whole second law. I think it's like 4 chapters or something.
Yep.
Oh, it's
Works
only
for me.
3. Oh, it's like 30 pages. You want to try
Okay.
to knock that out by Friday?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Love it.
All right, dude. Well, we can sign off on the recording.
Cool.
All right. Until